Good morning. Okay. Theosophy embodies both ancient and modern expressions of the ageless wisdom, and it has been entrusted to Theosophists as a heritage for preservation and dissemination. This body of knowledge can be archived in virtual reality and human memory. It can be accessed for interpretation, and it could serve as an agenda of action. By participating in this function, Theosophists have become keepers of the ageless wisdom in whatever context or in whatever political conditions you may be. A potent strategy in preserving the wisdom is to offer it to a wider audience, so the sacred teachings which have remained hidden from public attention for a long time are enriched by contemporary experience and become relevant to lives of entire communities as modern theosophy. By going public, there is greater chance of reaching people who are determined seekers, eager in unveiling mysteries and with creating meaning in life. Every theosophist and spiritual pilgrim begins as a seeker, someone who decides to follow an inner impulse to quest, to experience the fullness of being alive. The theosophist, as pilgrim, hopeful and bold, embarks on a journey hoping to find answers along the way. Many of us, all of us, are already part of this great adventure. This quest for the hidden truth in the enigma of existence is encoded in the ageless wisdom. And a very crucial part of it is known to many keepers as mysticism. At the core of all major religions is the mystical experience, and the goal of the mystic is the union or communion with the Absolute. It is the realization of individual consciousness with universal consciousness. This significant quality of the ageless wisdom has been explored and studied, but has largely remained in the realm of the esoteric, after being constantly sidelined from the mainstream of religious teachings. In this current era, when widespread social and political turmoil are fueled by sectarian intolerance, what do we have as seekers and keepers have to share? Perhaps it is time for the keepers to reveal what has remained timeless and priceless in the ancient or the ageless wisdom. It is time to share a prism of spirituality, of seeing and being. Mysticism implies that the world's religions share a universal truth that transcends the demands of dogma, the constraints of narrow factional interest, the popular appeal of rituals, and the impositions of power structures in institutionalized religion. The mystic core is often known as the wisdom tradition. And in every religion, there is a wisdom tradition. And it's meant to provide a conceptual and practical framework for awakening the inner self, for living a spiritual life, and the communion with the Absolute. It emphasizes an intuitive, experiential approach towards religion. In this light, the mystic is a pilgrim who undertakes a life journey to understand the fundamental divine gift in being human. Although not a popular facet in the world religions today, mysticism or the wisdom tradition periodically manifests itself in different times, places, and forms through the presence of great teachers who heavily influence their social milieu by practicing what they teach fearlessly and compassionately, and by making the ethical a distinct standard of being spiritual. Every religion has a mystical school or movement that inspires the seeker to discover the nature and source of the divine. Being both gnosis, esoteric knowledge, and praxis, technique or application, mysticism involves a system of discipline. Typically, mystics view their experience as part of a larger undertaking aimed at human transformation, from fleeting, momentary, to an abiding consciousness that accompanies a person throughout the days of his or her life. In her book, Mysticism, Evelyn Underhill characterizes the mystical quest into 5 phases: awakening to the divine, purgation of bodily desires, illumination of the mind, purification of the will, the unification of being with the divine. Sounds familiar. In many instances, the mystic experiences of various pilgrims are incoherent and confused before becoming focused and clearly defined. 2 important factors influence their personal experiences: social context, where you are, and individual temperament, who you are. Many who have chosen to quest are not able to complete the phases to the very end in one lifetime. Here is a summarized description of the phases based mainly on this study by Evelyn Underhill. Allow me to share this with you. Awakening. It usually starts with the feeling of divine discontent. The person realizes the inadequacy of a way of life that merely satisfies superficially. This induces the person to be a pilgrim in search of the true path. It is, I quote, the awakening of the self to consciousness of divine reality. It is tawbah, or conversion in Islam, metanoia in Eastern Orthodox Christianity. This experience, usually abrupt but distinct and well-marked, is accompanied by intense feeling of joy and exaltation. You felt this before. The pilgrim enthusiastically engages in studies and meet people who could provide clarity and meaning. There is that tendency to look for people who are also in this kind of frequency and this kind of quest. In the next stage, purification of the self, this is the stage of apatheia, or holy indifference in Eastern Orthodox Christianity. This process involves removing unwholesome conditionings and desires sheltered in the personality and hides the truth about the spiritual life. What are you indifferent to in holy indifferent? Indifferent to the cravings of the senses and of runaway emotions. This practice involves managing stress and emotional distress. This is actually the prelude to the practice of mindfulness. Here I was able to locate, and that's why I was attracted to the self-transformation seminar. That's why I became a theosophist. So when I participated in the self-transformation seminar, I became very curious. And I went to the Theosophical headquarters and found out more about Theosophy. And then I joined the self-transformation seminar, and everything just followed one after another. And now I'm here before you. The everyday action of the pilgrim has to follow a moral or ethical code such as the Buddhist paramitas, avoidance of the 7 cardinal sins in Christianity, the guidance of Viveka Chudamani, the Quest Jewel of Wisdom by Sri Sankaracharya. It could also mean a change in lifestyle due to lack of physical exercise, unhealthy diet, and other self-defeating habits like impulsive temper, smoking, excessive consumption of liquor, drug abuse, and so many others. At this stage, one learns to acknowledge the gift of grace and to express gratitude through prayers and meditation, acts of charity and service. The pilgrim also turns to nature for inspiration. I quote, "To look on trees, water, flowers," says Saint Teresa of Avila of her own mystic beginnings. "This helped me to recollect the presence of God." Plato also advised, and I quote, "The true order of going is to use the beauties of the earth as steps along which one mounts upwards for the sake of that other beauty. This too is the true order of holy poverty, the selfless use, not the selfish abuse of lovely and natural things. The selfless use, not the selfish abuse of lovely and natural things." The next stage is called illumination. It is the awakening of the buddhi, or the spiritual consciousness. In Zen, it is the experience of Kensho, self-realization, seeing into one's own nature, or Satori, a state of intuitive enlightenment. Illumination brings a certain apprehension of the absolute. So there is an understanding, apprehension, a sense of divine presence, but not yet true union. It is a state of happiness. The pilgrim experiences ecstatic moments in illumination, similar to awakening. The term ecstasy, for instance, as used by psychologists and some ascetics, defined that short and rapturous moment, a state well marked by physical and psychical experience in which the pilgrim loses consciousness of the phenomenal world and is caught up in a brief and immediate enjoyment of the divine vision. The awakening of the spiritual consciousness, however, can be gradual and imperceptible, as the buddhi becomes part of our daily consciousness. In Christian literature, it is known as the contemplative consciousness, or simply the presence, in the presence of the Lord. It forms with the two preceding stages the first mystic life. Not all mystics go beyond it, although many seers and artists have shared to some extent the experience of the illuminated state. The next stage is purification of the soul. It is the growth process after the spiritual consciousness has begun to become active. There are various stages and facets to it. There are certain conditions that arrest the progress in one's spiritual life. St. John of the Cross wrote about the dark night. The dark night of the soul overtakes the pilgrim because he or she treads an unfamiliar path in life while approaching the mystery of God or the Absolute. With faith, the pilgrim persists, and while walking through the darkness, becomes the light and brings him or her intimately closer to realizing the mystic goal. This second night of purification happens to those who made meditation or contemplation a part of their life. According to Saint Basil, when the individual advances in knowledge and practice, he realizes his weaknesses. The dark night happens. This is remedied by continued spiritual practice, accessis in Greek. In the renewal of character, when one consciously engages in self-discipline and dissolve the imaginary boundaries that separates the pilgrim from other beings. The final stage is union. It refers to the merging of the individual consciousness with the with the universal consciousness and the individual consciousness. It is called fana in Islam, moksha in Hinduism, nirvana in Buddhism, and theosis in Eastern Orthodox Christianity. The pilgrim becomes theos anir, the human perfected in the likeness of God. Many known mystics have attempted to explain this ineffable experience. In the Gospel of John, I and the Father are one. According to Plotinus, all that one sees as a spectacle is still external. One must bring the vision within and see no longer in the mode of separation as we know ourselves. Thus, a man filled with a God, possessed by Apollo or by one of the muses, needs no longer look outside for his vision of the divine being. It is but finding the strength to see divinity within. Julian of Norwich said, "Highly ought we to rejoice that God dwelleth in our soul, and much more highly ought we to rejoice that our soul dwelleth in God." Our soul is made to God's dwelling place, and the dwelling place of the soul is God, which is unmade. Although it is ineffable, as we have always, as it always said, mystics try their best to express their feelings, to express the experience, and this is how this is expressed. According to Underhill, in this state, the absolute life is not merely perceived and enjoyed as illumination, but is one with it. This is the culmination of previous oscillations of consciousness. It is a state of equilibrium, a pure spiritual life characterized by peaceful joy, by enhanced power, by intense certitude. Enhanced power, the faculties are awakened. Some of you might ask, so what happens? How does universal and individual consciousness merge? And I think you would have momentary illuminations of how it merges. It has something to do with love, devotion. And so it is love that bridges the individual with the universal consciousness. Find out for yourself. Despite difficulties and struggles, the mystic finds the inspiration to proceed and some of the reasons to complete the quest. So, for some of us, God or the Absolute can be experienced by knowing and participating in one's own divine nature. We learn about that along the way. To experience God or the Absolute requires a process of self-transformation that can be perceived through the development of human character, our own character, the changes in our behavior, and improved social relationships. But what prods us to move on? What inspires us to go further? Love, expressed in various circumstances and degrees, through kindness, empathy, compassion, and altruism, allows the mystic to persevere and endure despite formidable obstacles, making the quest an adventure of the pilgrim soul. Whatever is the outcome of the journey in this life, the most important fulfillment is having tried his or her best to perform duties out of respect for life and devotion to the divine. Mystics in various phases of their spiritual development do not renounce action or avoid claims of love. In most cases, they dedicate themselves to a life of service. Character determines one's destiny, isn't it? It is also true what a very ancient maxim tells us. One becomes what one loves. One of the essential features of the ageless wisdom is the ability of human beings to become perfect at the end of this process. To be a perfect human being does not mean that the pilgrim or the theosophist becomes an omniscient or omnipotent God. Self-realization, according to the ancient sages and to transpersonal psychologists, is the flowering of the human potentials that brings inner peace or liberates the pilgrim from unhappiness. But not only that, those who seek perfection make a vow to gain enlightenment at the shortest possible time so they can be worthy of helping others in gaining enlightenment. Thus, the pilgrim chooses to take the path of hastened attainment or the path of resurrection. In Theosophy, one who has attained human perfection becomes an adept. The qualities of the adept correspond with the qualities of the arhat in Buddhism, rishi in Hinduism, and the saint or Christos in Christianity. In Judaism, Messiah. Upon attaining perfection, one must decide to forego eternal liberation or ascension from this human condition. By doing so, he or she makes the supreme choice to reincarnate immediately in order to help others recognize the path and to take that path. The code of the Bodhisattva. The perfect human assumes this role without tampering with the duties of those who are being assisted in dealing with their own karma, without tampering with the duties of those being assisted in dealing with their own karma. The Christ, the Christos who is triumphant, becomes Savior by sharing His life with us, not by substituting Himself for us. The Godhead of the Absolute is present in each one. The Theosophist, as mystic, can address directly this divine presence. In Islam, it is a great sin to forget one's divine origin. It's ghafla. It implies not knowing who you really are and why you are really here. So who are people who forget their identity? They're supposed to suffer from amnesia. And those who suffer from amnesia, the cure to this state of amnesia, according to Plato, is anamnesis, or mindful recollection, meditation, contemplation. To remember or to have anamnesis, to practice anamnesis, we have to remember the planes of human consciousness because an important step in cultivating wisdom. The Theosophist, to be a keeper, must also have basic knowledge on the constitution and planes of human consciousness to help oneself and others ardently engage in self-transformation. In Theosophy, the term individuality, this is just a review, refers to the higher nature of the self, Atma, Buddhi, higher manas, and the personality refers to the lower quaternary of the self, lower manas, the emotional or astral, as we sometimes call it, etheric and physical. In the mystic stages, it is personality that undergoes purgation and purification, as mentioned earlier. It is the mystic duty of Theosophists to master one's lower self through the higher self. Helena P. Blavatsky once stated, "One only inflexible rule has ever been binding upon the neophyte, as it is binding now. The complete subjugation of the lower nature by the higher. From Vedas and Upanishads to the recently published Light on the Path, search as we may through the Bibles of every race and cult, we find one only way, hard, painful, troublesome, by which man can gain true spiritual insight, mastering of the lower self." It is so important that in Islam, after having a victory in Mecca, Muhammad and his armies were triumphant, but Muhammad reminded his people that the greater jihad is the struggle within ourselves, mastering the lower self. And the lower jihad is something that has to do with external. So the greater jihad is that of conquering the self. And one who goes through this struggle is called, the struggle is known as mujahadah. And those who undertake the mastering of the nafs or the lower self is a mujahideen. Take note how the terms have been corrupted by the lesser jihad. How it has been corrupted and used in so many ways. In Buddhism, one may conquer 10,000 soldiers and 10,000 battles, but the greatest conquest is one who is able to defeat himself. By taking the path, the theosophist becomes aware that adopting a process for self-realization is indispensable. Gautama the Buddha offered the Eightfold Path as a program of action. So there is a program of action. It's not just a framework. There's a program of action for the community of seekers and keepers so they can test, learn from their experience, and replicate the practice confidently. The Eightfold Path has been the subject of many commentaries, old and modern, and most of which are accessible to us. Yoga, another program of action, embraces the principle of oneness. The Sanskrit word yoga means identification or union or realized identity with the divine. It is a practice that provides the means to be aware of that relationship. It is based on the principle that the spiritual self within each one of us is of the same essence as the spirit of the cosmos. The hidden God within us has been buried by the mundane and the profane, that it is hardly noticeable. When yoga is practiced, the divine self is revealed, freed from the pettiness of the routine. It is an aid for the hastened unfoldment of the human consciousness. As a program of action, it consists of 8 progressive steps, and I won't go too much in that. Yama means harmlessness. Niyama means study, being in God's presence and contentment, since a person's conduct is mainly responsible for creating the conditions affecting him. He intelligently accepts the results of his behavior. Asana means posture. Posture is not limited to sitting meditation, but refers to the daily conduct or demeanor of this or disposition of the practitioner. Pranayama means controlling and directing the breath, and prana, the vital energy. Pratyahara means introspection. Dharana means concentration, focusing on whatever topic or object or mantra is chosen. And dhyana means contemplation, deep contemplation, absolute identification with what is being meditated. And then the 8th one is samadhi, complete absorption in the consciousness of the divine. These programs of action are accessible to us, and there are programs of actions in each religion, although some of them have not become accessible anymore. There are spiritual exercises, there are sadhanas, but these have to be reclaimed by each religion. Because the spirit of divine life cannot die, the mystic with an awakened consciousness is not bothered whether one completes or does not complete the entire transformative life or process in one lifetime. Saint Gregory of Nyssa once said, "It is absolutely necessary that the soul should be healed and purified. And if this does not take place during its life on earth, it must be accomplished in future lives." So this was in early Christianity. There was a time in early Christianity. Among Kabbalists, reincarnation or Gilgul does not punish or reward. It is concerned with the process of individual transformation by giving significance to the life of each person, as each individual has a special or particular task based on karma, but only he or she, but only I and you can accomplish, nobody else. Through reincarnation, the soul fulfills the divine plan. In that sense, there can be no organized salvation. The challenge is to be engaged in the stages of mystical development and to use this pattern of unfoldment in transforming our human nature towards being one with the divine. This is spiritual quest and something that I cannot forget because she agreed with me. It's the greatest adventure in life. And Joy Mills said that. And it involves preparing ourselves physically. It involves serious study, deep reflection and constant meditation, love for all beings, and dedication to serve those in need. One's duty is to determine in what stage of evolution you and I are at this present moment, so that one can develop the awareness to participate in the cosmic design or divine plan. It is Dharma to know where we are in the evolution. It is not easy, but those who have gone before us and those tremendously advanced in this lifetime can offer guidance in taking the path and in gaining a sense of wholeness or holiness while proceeding. Because individuals can be weak repositories or transmitters of wisdom, we have to belong to a particular culture that aims to make them dedicated and competent keepers of the wisdom. The theosophical organizations must provide this cultural experience, a reliable way of doing things based on constant practice and communal learning. We have to invest in developing the frontliners, those who will come after us, who will be at the front line of mainstreaming theosophy. The mentoring of potential leaders is crucially linked to character building and this society's mission. As keepers, the theosophical culture impels us to engage in continuous study and to test what we learn in everyday activities. In this culture, the theosophist learns why and how wisdom appeals to the individual, and why it is necessary to develop a sense of common well-being. One of the initial tasks of the theosophist, therefore, is to become familiar and to recognize the significance of the ageless or wisdom traditions. Mysticism, while undergoing studies, the theosophist attempts to integrate knowledge and practice to confront life challenges decisively and life choices with genuine fervor. I think one word that captures that is to be passionate about it. In the progress, one experiences what is worth sharing. And I think all of us can contribute to this kind of sharing, a deeper understanding of life. Once we become seekers and keepers, once we're in a quest, we are in a certain position to share what we are going through. The potency or the need for having universal values and ethical principles, increased capacity for self-awareness and for understanding life as it is, sense of responsibility and commitment to nurture relationships, something where we cannot fail, relationships, whether with fellow human beings or with other sentient beings. Empathy for those in need, and a compassionate desire to serve. strong sense of interconnection with all beings, and then to nurture the developed faculties of integrating the divine with the human, or the human with the divine. This theosophical heritage undoubtedly can enrich our lives and those of others. We learn to become comfortable with our silence. We learn to apply the laws of nature in all facets of our life. We seek, we keep, we share, and become who we really are. Thank you and good morning.